Hey there, it's me, Eva, and you're here to learn about more multilingualism and how to raise your kids with more than one language and a bit more sanity. Make sure you're subscribed. And even better, hit that notification bell so you know exactly when the next Damn Parenting episode drops. Yep, we're weekly on Wednesdays, but hey, you never know. There might be a bonus episode, might sneak in here or there. Go on, hit the button, save yourself some brain space. Now let's get into today's episode. Welcome back to Damn Parenting Podcast. I'm so glad you're here with us today. I'm your host, Eva. And well, when I was pregnant, I did what most of us were doing, right? I'm going to read everything there is. And somewhere between the baby names and the sleeping training and the feeding and God knows what else, I stumbled across this shiny idea called OPOL, one parent, one language. It actually dates all the way back to 1902 with a French linguist named Maurice Grammont. Pardon me to any French listeners listening, but they formally introduced that idea. Over a century later, it's still hailed as the gold standard for raising bilingual kids. And honestly, it sounded perfect. I'd speak one language, my partner speaks another language, and together we'd raise these effortlessly bilingual little humans. Simple, structured, and in theory, foolproof. Well, then the reality kind of happened, right? The exhaustion, mixed up sentences, can you say that in English moments? Because here's the truth that no one's actually going to write about language. It's not about words. It's about connection. It's about who we are when we speak to our children and who they become when they answer us back. So in today's episode, I'm thrilled to be joined back again with Mimi from Growing Up Multilingual. And together, we're unpacking what OPOL really looks like when it meets real families, real emotions, and real everyday life. Because if there's one thing we've learned, it's this. The one parent, one language rule might look gold on paper, but in practice, it's far more human, fluid, and beautifully imperfect than any textbook can explain, especially for our international families living here in the Netherlands. So once again, Mimi, welcome back.
Hi, it's great to be back. Thanks for having me.
So this is kind of a hot topic. So first off, let's break this all down. OPOL is often described as the gold standard, as I said, of bilingual parenting. But can you actually walk us through what it really means and why it's been praised for so long?
Sure, of course. So this is probably the most popular strategy, as you said already, for raising bilingual, multilingual children. So it doesn't matter if one of your languages is Dutch and the other one is English, or one of your languages is Spanish and your other language is French, and then there is Dutch in the environment. So doesn't matter if your child is growing up with 2, 3, 4, and so on languages. One parent, one language basically means that each parent at home consistently speaks one specific language to the child at all times. So the idea behind this, basically that you're trying to provide consistent input in two languages by each parent or caregiver. So the child also potentially will start to associate each language with a specific parent. So that's the idea. And of course, research supports that regular, consistent exposure to a language, especially in the early years, builds strong cognitive and language foundation. And kids feel secure knowing when and how each language shows up in their world. So in theory, and I really want to underline this, in theory, the one parent, one language really does set up kids to learn and tell their languages apart early on, but in theory. But the reality looks a little bit different. It sounds pretty intuitive, right? I speak one language, you speak another language. We keep speaking our languages and it kind of just happens. The child becomes a balanced bilingual. But there are a lot of issues and life keeps changing. And the truth is that we need to adapt to the changing life. And people really go after those balanced bilinguals where they have the perfect, here in quotation marks, the perfect level of language in each of their languages, whatever this elusive perfection means. I don't know. And we always see on social media how parents achieve this fantastic balanced bilingual kids and how they used OPOL. And a lot of those stories can create a lot of unrealistic expectations and the impression that there is indeed this, this one incredible approach that will fix all your problems and it's going to make it super easy for you. And to lot of people want this, and a lot of people want to emulate what they see on social media because it looks so flashy and it looks so great and so flawless. And of course, we shouldn't forget that nowadays social media heavily shapes how we perceive parenting. And we really need to keep in mind that we shouldn't take everything at face value because what we see and what it is are often two very different worlds. Speaking a language is not going to produce, again, in quotation marks, a perfect bilingual or a perfect balanced bilingual because there is a lot more to it than each parent speaking their language. It's a lot more complex. And let me give you an example here. I worked with this family. I'm not going to tell you what languages they speak, but they live in a monolingual society. They both spoke the language of the country that they lived in, and they really wanted to introduce English to their daughter because of the environment, because of their situation, and so on and so forth. And they were really worried because they kept expressing their wishes to friends and family, and everybody kept telling them this is not possible because if you want your child to be bilingual, you have to start from birth, and each of the parents need to speak the language. The child needs to start to associate this language with the parent. Otherwise, it's not going to work, which is not true. And she was completely mind blown when I told her, no, this is not true. And there are ways to do this. And it's absolutely doable. But it's really sad that people live with those beliefs. And those beliefs are being perpetuated by their environment and by their loved ones. And they're being told that it's not possible. Having said all that, I don't want to sound like I am rejecting it because this is not it. There is an absolutely a reason why it is so popular, but because it does bring benefits, but it's not a blanket solution. And it can get challenging with time. It's easier in the beginning, but as your child grows, it does get challenging. And just a personal anecdote, nothing to do with research, but with my own family. I asked my kids the other day, actually, for the purposes of our podcast today, I asked my kids if they would prefer if we only spoke one parent, one language, because we do mix quite a bit. I speak Bulgarian, my husband English, and obviously I'm the one who mixes more. And my daughter said we do use Dutch occasionally as well because it's inevitable. And they did say that mixing the languages and not keeping them strictly separated, it's super, super helpful because it helps them in a variety of ways. It helps them navigate depending on who they're talking to, what we're talking about. And the biggest one is vocabulary. Because my son said, if we're talking in Bulgarian and I don't understand something, we go to English, we discuss what it is, and then we can go back to Bulgarian. And my son, who is 10, my daughter 6, he said that it really, really helps him. And keeping strictly to one language is not going to be as good of a strategy for him.
Well, it sounds like it's a perfect formula, one parent and one language. But as you've actually pointed out, real life tends to complicate the picture. But thank you for doing the research with your own kids. Why do you think so many parents struggle to make strict OPOL work in practice, especially once kids start interacting with school and friends and TVs and God knows what else?
Oh gosh, there are a lot of reasons why this is challenging. First of all, the environment outside of the home plays a big role on language development. And when kids start venturing outside of the home more and more, let's say, they start to encounter the outside world more and more. Their interests start to change, their friendships start to change. The school takes a big part in this as well. So it's becoming really hard to stick and to keep being so strict. And of course, the globalized world just increases the exposure to multiple languages. There is a lot more opportunities nowadays to be exposed to different languages. And then we have, of course, parental language proficiency as well, depending what languages you're using with your child. Because sometimes you decide to raise your child with a language that is not your native language, which is absolutely doable, absolutely possible, but it depends on your own proficiency and how you handle it. And there are so many different scenarios as well that we don't really consider, like what if you spend the whole day working in the community language and then you come home and it's like this automatic reaction that you start speaking the community language and you don't feel like switching as much. And the community language, the majority language, is also the school language. There are a lot of people who have a really hard time switching when there are other people around them, which is absolutely valid because different people deal with this in different ways, and it should be honored. Everybody's feelings should be taken into consideration. And what if your partner doesn't speak or understand your language? Like it is in our case, I've made my peace with it, and my husband also doesn't mind it. He asks follow-up questions if he doesn't understand some things. With time, he's learned to understand a lot, but there are people who don't want to learn their partner's language. There are people who feel really bad when they don't understand absolutely everything that is said within the family environment. So again, all those things need to be taken into consideration when we think about being really strict with the one parent, one language, because it's not black and white. There is a huge gray area in between that we need to think about based on our own situation.
You mentioned that social media often romanticizes the one parent, one language and those perfect bilingual families, I guess you were saying, that make parents feel like they're failing if they're trying to do languages. And it's a huge issue here for us and our community here in the Netherlands, especially because we all need a dopamine hit. So we are all going to be scrolling. We already see clean houses, fully renovated houses, kids who can do everything and make their own beds. But from your own experience and research, what's the real story behind the pressure? And how can families stay confident, even if they're not doing it, as they would say, by the book?
Well, the most important thing is actually how much exposure your child receives, how much quality and quantity language your child receives. Because when each parent sticks to each of their languages, it's not a prerequisite for receiving enough quality and quantity language. Because as I said, it depends on so many factors. And there is another thing that this flashy, social media videos and social media reports make us believe that OPOL is the way to go, because it's also a form of making us feel in control a little bit. And as you said, there is so much out there that we're trying to emulate, but at the same time, we don't really have control over so many things. So we want to have some form of control. But again, this is very elusive sense of perfection that we're trying to reach, and there are no guaranteed outcomes no matter what we do. And language outcomes, they cannot be controlled. No matter what we do, in the end we have no control over what's going to happen in our children's lives and which way they'll decide to go, because at one point they also have to start taking control or being in control of their own language decisions. So what we can do, what we have control over right now, is providing enough quality and quantity exposure to each of the languages in question, and also creating an environment that is conducive to the development, a language-friendly environment that is conducive to the development of those languages. This is what we have control over, and this is what we can influence, because providing enough exposure, providing enough consistent quality exposure, it's not the same as each parent speaking their language. Those are not two equal things, and it shouldn't be used synonymously. If I can add one more thing, one thing that I very much dislike about the one parent, one language, and that I've seen it with people, it calls for repercussions. If you've decided to implement it and be very strict about it, there are parents who would be like, oh, I'm not going to respond to you if you don't respond to me in this language. I'm going to say that I don't understand my child if they don't respond to me in the same language that I'm addressing them in. And this can be really detrimental to your connection and to your bond with your child. So I plead with you, don't do this. That's all I wanted to say. This is really important to me.
I can see. So, for the parents listening who do want to raise multilingual kids here in the Netherlands, but are realizing now, having listened to this episode, that OPOL might not fit their reality or it might not sit well with them, especially as you just stated, the strictness that can be encompassed in following the regime, maybe. What practical advice would you give them to help them build a healthy and flexible language environment without the stress or guilt?
First of all, decide what languages you want to pass to your child. Think about your why, as we've talked about previous episodes, and see what you want to achieve in each of those languages and see how you can achieve it, what kind of resources you have at your disposal. Because it's very important to be consistent in providing language exposure, but it doesn't mean consistency only on your part. It means consistent exposure in general. So it doesn't need to be only from you. That's why we talk about having language partnerships with different stakeholders. So your resources, be it the babysitter or be it the daycare or be it someone else. So see what resources you have at your disposal and where you can get this support from. Keep in mind that you don't have to use only one language approach. You can mix and match depending on your circumstances and on your needs. And also keep in mind that perfect balance is very rare and you're actually expected to adapt over time. Deciding to use one parent, one language doesn't mean that you have to do it all through high school, because I guarantee you it's not going to work. And keep in mind that there is no perfect formula. It's your formula, what works for you and how you can achieve and provide the exposure and need and motivation that is needed for your child to develop their languages.
Well, thank you, Mimi, for joining us again. I mean, I think this was one topic, it's been on our list to discuss as soon as possible once we started this mini series. So I'm delighted to actually have it out. As you mentioned earlier, quite a lot of the episodes that have led up to this every single month, Mimi has been creating these building blocks to really help families understand their why, understand their motivation, understand each other as parents raising a child with different languages. So be sure to go back and check all those episodes out. So after all of that, here's what I'm taking away. OPOL isn't something to fear or follow blindly. It's just one of the many ways to raise multilingual kids, and it doesn't have to be perfect to work. Yeah, one parent, one language has strong foundations. It has been around for 100 years, right? But more than a rule, it's a tool. And tools only work when they fit the hands that use them. If you've ever been told that OPOL is the only way, or that mixing languages will somehow confuse your child, take a breath. You're not doing it wrong. You're figuring out what works best for your family, in your reality. Because as Mimi always reminds us, your language plan is a living document. It grows, it shifts, and it adapts, just like your children. So keep speaking, keep connecting, and keep giving your kids the gift of language in whatever way feels natural and true to your family. If today's episode has helped you see things a little differently, be sure to share it with a parent who needs to hear this. Or don't forget to follow and subscribe so you can catch next week's episode of Damn Parenting. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next Wednesday with some more real talk about raising kids across cultures, languages, and a whole lot of love. Until next time.